The money teaching they tried to bury in 1925. It survived in one book. Florence Scovel Shinn. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that the spoken word is a wand, that consciousness shapes the substance of our lives long before that substance ever appears in the hand, and that supply is a spiritual law waiting only for our belief to release it. Let us begin with the premise. In the Psalms it is written, "I am the Lord thy God, which brought thee out of the land of Egypt. Open thy mouth wide, and I will fill it." That is Psalm 81, verse 10. And friend, hear what is being said here. The filling is not the condition. The filling is the promise. The opening of the mouth is the only condition asked of you. So many of us have kept our mouths nearly closed our whole lives, asking in whispers for what we need, when all along the fullness was standing ready the moment we dared to ask wide open. So here is our decree for today. Say it with me. My mouth is open wide. My good is rushing in now. My word is my wand. Again, my mouth is open wide. My good is rushing in now. My word is my wand. Feel that as you say it, not as a wish, but as a wand lifted in your own hand. And because tomorrow another teaching will arrive to open another door for you, I gently invite you to subscribe now, so that it finds you right on time and not a moment late. If you feel something stirring in you even now, some little flame of readiness, type the word supply in the comments below. Let it be your own small decree that you are done waiting and ready to receive. The first law is, open your mouth wide. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that most people go through life asking for pennies when they were meant to ask for kingdoms. And she taught that the mouth she spoke of was never only the physical mouth, but the whole attitude of the heart, the shape of our asking, the size of the request we allow ourselves to even imagine. She told of a woman who came to her wanting the courage to ask her employer for a small raise, just enough to cover the rent, and Florence told her, "Ask for the whole vision, not the crumb." The woman went in trembling and asked for far more than she thought she deserved, and to her shock, she received it. Because the universe does not ration according to our need, it responds according to our asking, and our asking is shaped entirely by our believing. Think of how a child asks, without apology, without measuring whether the request is reasonable, and think of how we, as grown and careful adults, have trained ourselves to ask small, to request only what feels safe, to soften our desires into modest little whispers, so that if the answer is no, it will not sting too much. This is the very habit that keeps the mouth nearly closed. I think of a man who needed a new position, and for months he applied only to roles slightly beneath his ability, telling himself he was being humble, when in truth he was simply afraid to open his mouth wide enough to ask for what he actually wanted. It was only when a friend asked him plainly, "What would you ask for if you knew you could not be refused?" that something in him cracked open, and he applied, that same week, for the role he had secretly wanted all along, and was given it. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that there is no limit at the source. The limit is only ever in the mouth that will not open. So today, stop whispering your requests to life. Stop asking for just enough. The same breath it takes to ask for a little is the same breath it takes to ask for abundance. So speak this decree with me. My mouth is open wide today. My mouth is open wide today. The second law is, supply is already here, waiting only to appear. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that the universe is not a factory that must manufacture your good after you ask for it. It is a storehouse already stocked to overflowing, and your faith is simply the key that opens the door that was shut only in your own perception. So much of our suffering around money comes from believing that our good must be created out of nothing, summoned from some far-off place through great effort and struggle. But Florence Scovel Shinn taught that this is never the truth of it. The substance is already prepared, already present, already circling near you, waiting only for the eye of faith to recognize it and call it by name. She told the story again and again in her writings of women who needed a specific sum of money and found it already near them, tucked into a coat pocket, folded inside a book, owed to them by someone who had simply forgotten. The money was not conjured from nothing. It was already present, waiting to be recognized. I think of a woman I will call Ruth, who needed rent money and had convinced herself there was no way it could come in time. She sat one evening going through an old winter coat she had not worn in months, meaning to give it to charity, and in the inner pocket she found an envelope with cash she herself had hidden there the previous year and forgotten completely. The money had been resting quietly in the dark the entire time she was worrying. And I think too of how many of us have a version of that coat pocket somewhere in our own lives, an old debt someone still intends to repay, a refund quietly working its way through the mail, a talent sitting unused that could be turned into income the moment we dared to offer it. This is the deeper teaching, that lack is never really about the absence of supply. It is about the absence of recognition. The storehouse does not need to be filled. It needs to be seen. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that we live surrounded by an invisible abundance that is only waiting for our eye of faith to see it and claim it. Imagine walking through a house at night with the lights off, insisting there is no furniture in the room simply because your eyes cannot yet see it. The furniture was never missing, only your recognition of it was missing. And the moment the light is switched on, nothing has changed in the room except your ability to see what was always there. This is exactly how supply behaves in our lives. So when you feel that your good is far away, remind yourself that it may in fact be nearer than your own hand, hidden only by your habit of expecting less. Faith is not the force that creates your supply from nothing. Faith is the eye that finally sees what has been provided all along. So speak this decree with me. My supply is already here waiting to appear. My supply is already here waiting to appear. The third law is, fear closes the channel. Faith opens it. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that fear is the only real poverty a person can suffer, because fear does not simply feel unpleasant, it physically and spiritually constricts the very channel through which our good must travel to reach us. Think of what fear does in the body. The throat tightens, the chest closes, the breath grows shallow, and this is no accident. It is the outer picture of the inner condition. A mind gripped by fear is a mind that has closed its own receiving station. And Florence Scovel Shinn taught that this is why so many earnest, hard-working people remain stuck in narrow circumstances, not because supply has refused them, but because their own fear has pinched the pipe through which supply must flow. I knew of a man, we will call him Daniel, who lost his position rather suddenly, and in the weeks that followed, fear took hold of him so completely that he stopped answering calls, stopped following leads, stopped even opening the letters that came to his door. Because he was certain each one carried more bad news, he began rationing his own grocery money down to almost nothing, not because he had to yet, but because fear had convinced him that disaster was already at his heels. He stopped visiting old friends because he was ashamed, and in doing so, he cut off the very channels through which his help was most likely to come. Opportunities came near him during this time and quietly passed him by, not because they were withheld from him, but because his own fear had drawn the shutters closed over his house. Picture a shopkeeper who bolts every door and covers every window the moment a single cloud appears on the horizon, and then wonders in the darkness why no customers ever find their way inside. That is precisely what fear does to a life. It does not simply feel bad. It acts. It closes. It bars. It hides. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that faith, real active faith, is not a soft feeling. It is a substance. It is something you can build, the same way you build a muscle, one decree at a time, one act of trust at a time. And she taught that the opposite of fear is never mere positive thinking. It is a settled knowing that all is well, even when the evidence has not yet arrived to prove it. Daniel's turning point came on an ordinary evening when, exhausted from fear itself, too tired even to keep bracing for disaster, he simply said out loud to the empty room, "I am willing to trust again." And something in him loosened, his shoulders dropped, his breath came easier. Within days, he opened one letter he had been avoiding for nearly 2 weeks, and inside was an invitation to interview for a role even better suited to him than the one he had lost. The door had been sitting there the entire time, patiently. His fear alone had kept it looking closed. So hear this clearly. Fear does not attract misfortune out of some cosmic punishment. Fear simply closes the very channel that faith would have kept wide open. And just as fear can close a channel in a single evening, faith can reopen it in a single decree, spoken with real feeling behind it. When you feel fear rising in you today, do not fight it with more fear about your fear. Simply return your attention gently to the truth that all is well. Unclench the hand, unclench the throat, unclench the breath, and watch the channel begin to open again. So speak this decree with me. I release fear now, and let faith flow freely through me. I release fear now, and let faith flow freely through me. The fourth law is, you cannot receive above your own self-concept. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that we do not attract what we want, we attract what we secretly believe ourselves to be, and this may be the quietest of all the laws we walk through together, because it works beneath the surface, beneath the decree, beneath even the prayer. You can open your mouth wide, you can release fear, and still watch your good arrive only in small measures, thin measures, measures that never quite match the size of what you asked for, and the reason is almost always the same. Underneath the words you are still carrying a small, worn, modest picture of who you are, and that picture, not the words, is what the universe is actually reading. Think of the self-concept as the thermostat of your life, not the thermometer. The thermometer only reports what is already there, but the thermostat sets what the room is allowed to become. You can complain about the temperature of your life all day, more money, better work, a finer home, but if the thermostat inside you is still set to just getting by, the room will keep drifting back to just getting by, no matter how many times you complain. I think of a woman I will call Grace, who worked for years as a secretary, capable, dependable, quietly brilliant, but who described herself constantly, even in jest, as someone who was just getting by, just scraping through, just managing. She said these words so often, in elevators, at dinner tables, to strangers on trains, that they became a kind of private scripture, and her outer life obediently matched the scripture, rather than her talent. She was passed over for promotions she was clearly qualified for. She found herself always just barely covering her bills, never quite ahead, and if you had asked her why, she would have told you it was the economy, or her employer, or simply bad luck, when in truth it was a sentence she had been unconsciously decreeing about herself for years. One day, a mentor gently pointed out to her that she introduced herself to strangers, even in casual conversation, as just a secretary, and asked her, "Would you introduce a queen as just a woman who wears a crown?" Grace was startled into silence, and in that silence something shifted. She began, quietly at first, to speak of herself differently, not as just anything, but as someone capable, someone valuable, someone whose skill was rare. Within a year, without dramatically changing her actions, her whole position had changed. She was offered a role with real authority, at nearly double her former salary. And the strange part, she said afterward, was that nothing outside her had forced this change. She had simply stopped agreeing with the small sentence, and the outer world had no choice but to follow the new one. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that the outer world is simply a mirror held up to the inner self concept. If the mirror shows you something small, the fault is never in the mirror. The fault, or rather the invitation, is in the figure standing before it. And this is why so many people work tremendously hard and remain stuck. They are laboring to change the reflection while never once touching the figure that casts it. They polish the glass, they rearrange the frame, they even change rooms entirely. New job, new city, new relationship, and still the same small figure appears in the new mirror, because the figure was never the room, the figure was carried within them the entire time. Let me give you another picture of this same law, because it wears many disguises. I think of a man I will call Walter, who ran a small repair shop and who, whenever a customer complimented his work, would wave it off and say, "Oh, it is nothing, anyone could do this." He meant it as humility, but Florence Scovel Shinn would have called it a decree, spoken aloud, again and again, that his own skill was worth nothing, and true to the law, his shop stayed small for years, undercharging, overworking, barely surviving. A friend finally challenged him and asked, if a customer complimented a fine violin, would the violin apologize for its own sound? Walter began, slowly, to accept the compliments instead of deflecting them, to say simply, "Thank you, I take real pride in this work." And to his own surprise, within months, customers began referring him for larger jobs, jobs he would once have felt unworthy to even quote a price for. Nothing in his actual skill had changed. What changed was the concept he carried of the value of that skill, and the outer world, ever obedient, adjusted its offerings to match the new inner price tag. This is the deeper teaching hidden inside this law, that self-concept functions like a price tag you hang on your own being, long before any transaction ever occurs. If you have quietly priced yourself as modest, the universe, which is not cruel but simply exact, will not overpay you. It is not punishing you. It is agreeing with you. This is actually good news, because it means the moment you change the price tag, the terms of every future transaction begin to change as well. You do not need to convince the whole world of your new worth all at once. You only need to convince the one place where the world is actually listening, which is your own inner conversation about yourself. So I ask you gently today, what have you been calling yourself? What modest little sentence have you repeated about your own worth so many times that it has become your ceiling? Is it, "I am just someone who scrapes by"? Is it, "I am not the type of person who has money"? Is it, "Good things do not happen to people like me"? Listen closely to how you speak of yourself, even in passing, even in jest, even in the small throwaway comments you make, to soften a compliment or excuse a shortcoming, because Florence Scovel Shinn taught that these small, careless sentences are decrees exactly as powerful as the grand ones spoken in prayer. The universe does not grade your words by how seriously you meant them. It simply takes them as instructions. It is time to raise the self-concept before you raise the effort, because effort without a raised self-concept only produces more of the same modest results, faster. You will simply work harder to stay exactly where you already are. This is why some people labor for decades without ever changing their circumstances, not because they lacked effort, but because the effort was spent maintaining a small identity rather than expanding into a larger one. When you begin to see yourself as one who is provided for richly, as one whose talents are valuable, as one who belongs among the abundant, something remarkable happens. You begin to carry yourself differently. You begin to speak differently. You begin, almost without noticing, to expect better treatment, better terms, better outcomes, not out of arrogance, but out of quiet, settled dignity. And the outer conditions, which have no will of their own apart from the one you give them, have no choice but to slowly rearrange themselves to agree with this new inner picture. And here is the gentlest part of this teaching. You do not have to force this change through willpower or grit your teeth into believing something you do not yet feel. You simply begin speaking of yourself the way you would speak of someone you deeply respected. You catch yourself mid-sentence when the old small label tries to slip out, and you replace it gently, patiently, the way you would correct a child you loved, over and over, until the new sentence feels less like a performance and more like the truth it always secretly was. So speak this decree with me. I see myself as rich, capable, and worthy of abundance. I see myself as rich, capable, and worthy of abundance. The fifth law is, follow the flash before doubt can speak. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that divine guidance rarely arrives as a long, reasoned argument. It arrives as a flash, a sudden hunch, a quiet inner nudge that says, do this now, go here now, call this person now. And she taught that the great tragedy of most lives is not that this guidance fails to come. It comes constantly. The tragedy is that we talk ourselves out of it in the 3 seconds between receiving it and reasoning ourselves back into safety. Think for a moment of how differently we treat an inner nudge compared to how we treat a ringing telephone. When the phone rings, we answer it without a single argument. We do not sit there for 10 minutes debating whether the caller really means to reach us. And yet when the far more reliable line of intuition rings quietly within us, we let it ring and ring, while our reasoning mind stands guard at the door, refusing to pick it up. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that this inner line is never once disconnected. It is always open, always ringing softly beneath the noise of daily life, waiting only for a person quiet enough and brave enough to answer it. I think of a woman I will call Vivian, who one afternoon had a sudden and strange impulse to visit an old friend she had not spoken to in over a year. There was no obvious reason for it, no anniversary, no occasion, and her first instinct was to dismiss the thought as silly. But she had been practicing, slowly, the discipline of following these flashes rather than arguing with them. So she went. Her friend answered the door in surprise and said, I was just thinking of you this morning. I have a position opening at my company, and your name came to mind before anyone else's. Within 2 weeks, Vivian had the job, and it was work she had quietly longed for, without ever speaking it aloud to another soul. Notice what did not happen here. Vivian did not sit down and make a careful list of reasons why visiting her friend made logical sense. She did not wait until she had gathered enough evidence to justify the trip. She simply felt the nudge and moved her feet before her mind had the chance to build a case against it. This is the whole art of this law, moving the feet before the mind can finish its objection. Florence Scovel Shinn called this kind of guidance the flash of intuition, and she taught that it is always accurate, always kind, always on time, but it is also always fragile, in the sense that reasoning can talk it out of existence in an instant. The mind that says, but that makes no sense, but I have no reason to do that, but what will people think, is a mind busy strangling its own guidance in the crib. And here is the part so many of us miss. That strangling does not feel violent from the inside. It feels responsible. It feels mature. It feels like caution. We call it being sensible, when really, we are simply murdering a message before we ever let it finish speaking. I remember hearing of a man I will call Harold, who worked for years in a modest office position and who one ordinary Tuesday felt a sudden, oddly specific urge to walk down a street he never normally used on his way home. His reasoning mind offered him every excuse to ignore it. It is out of the way. It will make me late. There is nothing down there for me. And yet the nudge persisted with a gentle stubbornness that finally won out. He walked that unfamiliar street and passed a small shop with a hand-lettered sign in the window, advertising for help. Something in him, without any calculation at all, walked inside. That small shop turned out to be the beginning of a business partnership that changed the whole shape of his working life within 2 years. Harold said afterward that if he had given his reasoning mind even 5 more minutes to argue, He would have talked himself right back onto his usual street and never known what he had missed. This does not mean acting recklessly on every passing whim. Florence Scovel Shinn was careful to distinguish a true flash from mere anxious impulse. The mind that is agitated, fearful, or grasping produces a very different quality of thought than the mind that is quiet and receptive. A true flash comes gently, but with a certain unmistakable clarity. It does not shout, it does not argue, it does not press or nag or repeat itself with panic. It simply suggests, once, clearly, and then it waits peacefully to see if you will trust it. Anxious impulse, on the other hand, is loud, urgent, full of fear, and usually tries to convince you through pressure rather than through peace. Learning to tell these two voices apart is itself part of walking faithfully in this law, and the way to tell them apart is not through more thinking, but through noticing the feeling underneath the thought. Does it feel like a quiet door opening, or does it feel like something chasing you toward a decision? The flash always feels like the door, never like the chase. The practice, then, is this. When the flash comes, act on it quickly, before the long committee meeting of doubt can be called to session in your mind. Picture that committee for a moment. All those familiar voices taking their seats around the table the instant a flash arrives. The voice of fear, the voice of what will people think, the voice of, but I have never done this before, the voice of, let me wait until I am more certain. If you allow that committee to convene even once, it will very rarely vote in favor of the flash. Committees formed by doubt are built to protect the familiar, not to escort you toward the unfamiliar goodness that is trying to reach you. So the aim is not to defeat the committee in a long debate. The aim is to leave the room before the meeting can even be called, to act, simply and quietly. While the flash is still warm, Florence Scovel Shinn taught that we live and move within an intelligence far wiser than our own careful calculations, and that this intelligence is constantly trying to signal us toward our good through exactly these small, unremarkable nudges. A name that suddenly comes to mind, a street we suddenly feel drawn to walk down, a phone call we suddenly feel we should make, a book that suddenly catches our eye on a shelf we were not even looking at. None of these announce themselves with trumpets. They arrive small, and they can be dismissed in an instant if we are not paying attention. So many of us look back over the years at moments when we ignored a quiet inner prompting and later discovered exactly what we would have found had we followed it. And we call this regret, but really it is simply unclaimed guidance. The door was there, the guidance was accurate, we simply did not walk through in time. This is why the discipline matters so deeply, not because we must chase every fleeting thought through the day, but because we must learn, gradually and patiently, to recognize the particular texture of the true flash, and once we recognize it, to honor it swiftly. So many doors have stood open only for a moment, while we stood outside them arguing with ourselves about whether it made sense to walk through. Let today be different. Let the next quiet nudge that arrives in your own mind be met not with a committee of doubt, but with a single, willing step. So speak this decree with me. I follow my inner guidance instantly and without doubt. I follow my inner guidance instantly and without doubt. The sixth law is, right action clears the road ahead. Florence Scovel Shinn taught often of what she called divine right action, the idea that when we do the task directly in front of us, with excellence, with love, and without resentment, we are not simply completing a chore, we are laying the very road on which our larger good will travel toward us. She taught that the universe does not read our words alone, it reads our hands. It watches what we do with the ordinary hour we have been given, and it answers not according to our longing, but according to our doing. So many people wait to feel inspired before they will give their best effort. They imagine that excellence is something to be saved for the important moment, the big client, the dream job, the grand opportunity, still somewhere out ahead of them. And in the meantime, they hand the small daily tasks only a tired, resentful fraction of themselves, answering the phone with a sigh, greeting the customer with a flat voice, finishing the report just well enough to avoid trouble. But Florence Scovel Shinn taught that this is exactly backward, because the present moment, however small it looks, is the only road there is. There is no separate, secret road called the future that bypasses the present. The future is simply built, plank by plank, out of how we treat what is right in front of us today. And so when we drag our feet through the present task, we are not saving our excellence for later. We are digging up the very road our good must someday travel down to reach us. Let me tell you of a woman I will call Marion, who sold insurance policies for a modest company in a modest town, and for months she handled every small account with the same full attention and warmth she would want to give a much larger client. She returned every phone call the same day. She remembered the names of her clients' children. She filled out every form with care, even when the commission on the account barely covered her gasoline for the drive. Her colleagues sometimes teased her gently for taking such trouble over accounts that paid so little. They told her to save her energy for the accounts that mattered. But Marion had a quiet understanding, planted in her by an old teacher long before, that there is no such thing as an account that does not matter, that every task handled with love becomes a stone laid in a road whose destination she could not yet see. One ordinary Tuesday, one of those very small clients, a retired schoolteacher who had never given Marion more than the smallest policy, mentioned her name in passing to a nephew who happened to be searching for exactly the kind of coverage Marion specialized in, and that nephew ran a company far larger than anything Marion had ever imagined serving. The referral came with no ceremony, no announcement, no signal that this was the day her life would change. It arrived disguised as an ordinary Tuesday, wearing the costume of a small, unremarkable kindness she had extended months before and long since forgotten, and that single referral, tended so carefully, changed the entire shape of her career. This is the pattern Florence Scovel Shinn pointed to again and again in her writings. That our good rarely announces itself with trumpets. It usually slips in through the side door of an unremarkable task, wearing work clothes, looking like nothing at all. Now consider the opposite picture for a moment. Consider what happens when resentment is allowed to sit at the desk instead of love. If Marion had handled that school teacher's small policy with a sigh, with the sloppy, distracted attention we give to things we have privately decided are beneath us, would that same referral ever have come? Florence Scovel Shinn taught that resentment is a kind of static in the wires. It does not simply feel unpleasant in the moment. It actually interferes with the transmission of our own good. When we perform a task while inwardly complaining about having to perform it, we are, in effect, decreeing over that very task that it is not worthy of our best, and the universe, ever faithful to our own decree, agrees with us completely and gives us exactly what we have declared, more tasks unworthy of our best. This is why some people work tremendously hard for years and remain stuck in the very same place. They mistake motion for right action. They are laboring furiously, but with resentment woven through every hour of it. And resentment cannot build a road toward abundance. It can only build a longer road of the very same kind of labor they resent. Right action also asks something else of us, and this is a gentler, quieter teaching. It asks us to release the anxious grasping and striving that so many of us have mistaken for effort itself. There is a great difference between working with peace and working with dread. A woman can wash the same dishes, answer the same emails, fold the same laundry, either as a small prisoner counting the minutes until this thankless task is over, or as one who understands that this dish, this email, this fold of cloth, done with full attention, is itself a form of prayer. is itself a decree spoken not with the mouth but with the hands. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that when we do what is ours to do today, fully and without straining toward tomorrow, we free divine intelligence to arrange the larger sequence of events on our behalf. This is not passivity dressed up in spiritual language. It is active faith, expressed quietly through the hands, rather than loudly through the mouth. The striving mind believes it must force every door itself, while the right acting mind understands that its only task is the door directly in front of it, and that the next door will open precisely because this one was tended with love. So I ask you gently today, what is the small task sitting in front of you right now that you have quietly decided does not deserve your best? Is it the job that feels beneath your talents? Is it the small client, the modest chore, the unglamorous errand, the ordinary conversation you would rather rush through? Whatever it is, however small it may seem, however unrelated it may appear to the larger dream you are holding in your heart, give it your whole heart anyway, because you cannot see the road from where you stand. You can only see the single stone beneath your own 2 feet, and that stone, laid with love today, is the very stone your good will one day walk across to reach you. So speak this decree with me: I do the task before me with full love, and the road opens. I do the task before me with full love, and the road opens. The 7th law is, expectancy is the cup that catches your blessing. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that faith without expectancy is like digging a well and then walking away before the water has a chance to rise. She taught that the spoken decree is only the first half of the work. The second half is the quiet, steady posture of the one who has spoken it, standing with an open cup lifted toward the sky, certain that something is already falling toward that cup, even before a single drop can be seen. So many of us decree beautifully in the morning. We say the words with real feeling, and then within the hour, we quietly set the cup down, we turn it upside down without even noticing, and we go about the day bracing for disappointment instead of watching for delivery. This bracing, this anxious watching, is itself a form of doubt, wearing the costume of attentiveness. It looks like waiting, but it is actually resistance, because true expectancy has a lightness in it, a kind of cheerful certainty, while anxious watching has a heaviness in it, a kind of rehearsed grief for a loss that has not even happened yet. Florence Scovel Shinn drew a very careful line between hoping and expecting. Hoping has a tremble hidden inside it, a fear that the answer might be no. Hoping says, I want this so badly, please let it happen. Expecting has a settled calm inside it. Expecting says, this is already arranged, and only the timing remains to be revealed. One keeps the cup lowered and trembling, the other keeps the cup lifted and still. I think of a woman who came to understand this law through her own small, deliberate practice. She called it her expectancy corner, a modest table by her window, where each morning she would place some small physical symbol of the good she was expecting before there was any visible sign that it was on its way. An empty vase, waiting to be filled with flowers she had not yet been given. An empty picture frame, waiting for a photograph from a journey she had not yet taken. A single place setting at her table, waiting for a guest whose name she had not yet learned. At first this felt strange to her, almost foolish, setting the table before anyone had knocked. But she kept at it faithfully, and she said something remarkable happened in her own body as she did. Her shoulders, which had been carrying a low, constant tension for months, began to soften. Her breath, which had been shallow and quick whenever she thought of her unmet need, began to slow and deepen. She said, I stopped wondering if my good would come, and I started arranging my house for its arrival, and that single shift in posture changed the entire atmosphere of her days. She was no longer a woman waiting for bad news at the mailbox. She had become a hostess, quietly preparing for a beloved guest, who had already confirmed they were coming. And when the good she needed did arrive, some months later, in a form she had not fully anticipated, she said it felt less like a surprise and more like a guest finally walking through a door that had been standing open and ready the whole time. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that this preparation, this small physical act of clearing a space, setting a table, opening a drawer, is itself a decree more powerful than words, because words can sometimes be spoken absent-mindedly, but the clearing of a shelf, the setting of a table, requires the body to agree with the mouth, and when the body and the mouth agree, the whole being becomes a single, unbroken statement of faith. Think of how differently a household feels when it is preparing for a joyful visitor compared to a household bracing for bad news. In the first, there is a lightness in the air. Cupboards are opened cheerfully. Rooms are tidied with a kind of hum. In the second, there is a tightness in every room. Footsteps are heavier. Voices are lower. And this is not merely a mood. Florence Scovel Shinn taught it is an actual spiritual atmosphere, a vibration that either welcomes the good in or quietly holds it at the door, your home, your body, your very daily conversation. All become either an expectancy corner or an anxiety corner, depending on which posture you choose to inhabit while you wait. Consider how expectancy shows itself in the smallest exchanges of an ordinary day. A woman expecting a job offer speaks of the position in the present tense to her friends, not as something she is hoping for, but as something already unfolding. A man expecting healing speaks of his body's strength rather than rehearsing his list of symptoms to every person who asks how he is. This is not denial of the current moment. It is refusal to let the current moment have the final word. Expectancy always keeps one eye on the promise, even while the other eye tends gently to the present task. And this is precisely what allows a person to remain steady rather than frantic, because frantic waiting exhausts itself quickly, while cheerful expectancy can be sustained indefinitely, since it costs the nervous system so little and feeds the spirit so richly. I have seen this law tested in ordinary places. A small shop owner once decreed for more customers during a slow season, and rather than simply saying the words and continuing to sit anxiously behind an empty counter, she began arranging her shelves each morning as though a crowd were coming that very afternoon. She polished the glass, she refreshed the displays, she greeted the empty room the same way she intended to greet a full one. Within weeks, her shop had filled, and she said afterward that she had simply been rehearsing, daily, in her body and her actions, the very abundance she had spoken in her words. This is the deeper secret inside this law, that expectancy is not a feeling you wait to arrive on its own. It is a posture you choose and practice. The same way a person practices any skill, a little clumsily at first, and then with growing ease, until finally it becomes the most natural way of standing in the world. So I ask you gently today, when you consider the thing you have been decreeing for, are you waiting for it the way one waits for bad news, with the shoulders raised and the breath held? Or are you waiting for it the way one waits for a beloved guest who has already confirmed they are coming, with the table set and the door left unlocked? Shift the posture. Lift the cup back up if you have quietly let it fall to your side, and watch how quickly the very atmosphere around your desire begins to change, simply because you have changed the way you are standing inside it. So speak this decree with me. I wait for my good with joyful, certain expectancy. I wait for my good with joyful, certain expectancy. The eighth law is, release the how and trust the infinite channels. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that one of the surest ways to block our own good is to insist, quietly but stubbornly, on the exact method by which it must arrive. We decide that our raise must come through our current employer, that our healing must come through this particular doctor, that our rescue must come through this particular relative. And in doing so, we take an infinite, resourceful universe and squeeze it down into a single narrow pipe, and then we wonder why the water seems slow to come. And I want you to notice something gently here. This insisting on the one channel is rarely spoken aloud as doubt. It usually wears the disguise of being practical, of being reasonable, of simply making a plan. But underneath the plan, there is often a quiet fear whispering that if it does not come this one way, it will not come at all. And that fear is what does the true blocking, not the wanting itself. Florence Scovel Shinn taught instead that supply moves through infinite channels, most of which the reasoning mind could never map in advance. And our task is not to dictate the road, but simply to hold the vision of the result with a calm, open hand and release the method entirely into a higher intelligence. Let me give you a picture of how this looks in an ordinary life. Think of a mother, I will call Helen, who needed a certain sum before the school term began for her son, and in her mind there was only one door, a promised bonus at her workplace that had been discussed for months. She built her whole piece around that single door, checking with her manager again and again, growing more anxious with each passing week as the bonus kept being delayed. She had, without realizing it, become the farmer digging up her own seed daily. She had also, without realizing it, become the river that dams itself down to one narrow channel and then wonders why it feels so dry. One evening, worn out from her own gripping, she finally said the quiet words, "I release the how, I only hold the need, and I trust it will be met." And she meant it, not as a defeat but as a true letting go. Within that same week, the bonus at work fell through entirely, exactly as she had feared, and for a moment the old panic rose in her. But 2 days later, a cousin she had not spoken to in years called simply to catch up, and upon hearing what Helen was walking through, offered to cover the exact amount without being asked. That channel had never once appeared on Helen's mental map. She could not have engineered it, planned for it, or even imagined it. And that, friend, is precisely the deeper teaching here. The channel we release our grip on is very often not even the channel that ends up serving us. And that is by design, not by accident, because a supply that arrives through a door we did not build cannot be credited to our own striving. It can only be received the way a gift is received, with open hands and a humble, grateful heart. Think of it this way. The mind that insists on one channel is behaving like someone standing at a single window of a great house, arms crossed, refusing to imagine that any of the other 100 windows in that house might open instead. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that the universe is a house of many windows, many rivers, many unseen tributaries, all feeding the same shining pool of our good. And our work is never to stand guard at one window. Our work is simply to trust the pool itself, to know that it is being fed, even when we cannot trace the path of the water. This is why she taught so often that our good will arrive through unexpected sources, a forgotten debt suddenly repaid, a stranger's small kindness returned tenfold, an opportunity offered by someone we barely remember helping. None of these can be planned by the reasoning mind, and that is exactly why they so often carry the unmistakable fingerprint of a wisdom greater than our own. When you catch yourself saying it has to happen this way, or it has to come from that person, gently interrupt the thought, not with force, but with a soft correction, something like, "I do not know how this will come, and I do not need to know. I only need to know that it will come." And here is a second angle worth sitting with. Releasing the how is not the same as doing nothing. It does not mean folding your hands and waiting passively for a miracle to fall from the sky while you sit idle. It means you still do the task in front of you. You still knock on the doors that are reasonably yours to knock on. You still make the calls, send the letters, show up for the interview. But you do all of this with a loose grip instead of a desperate one. You do it the way one plants seeds in several parts of a garden, rather than pouring every hope into a single seedling and standing over it with anxious eyes. The difference is entirely in the posture of the heart. One person knocks on a door, hoping it is the only door, and trembling that it might close. Another person knocks on the same door in perfect peace, knowing that if this door does not open, some other door surely will. Both may take the same outward action, but only one of them is practicing this law, because this law lives in the quality of the trust, not in the quantity of the effort. I think, too, of how often we complicate our own healing this way, insisting our peace of mind must come from one particular apology, our security must come from one particular investment, our happiness must come from one particular relationship, being repaired exactly as we picture it. And Florence Scovel Shinn taught that this narrowing of the channel is often the very thing standing between us and the very peace we are demanding. Release the exact form the answer must take, and trust instead the results you are truly after. More peace, more provision, more love, and let the infinite intelligence decide the shape those blessings will wear when they finally arrive. So today, wherever you find yourself gripping tightly to one single idea of how your good must come, gently loosen that grip. Hold the outcome firmly and warmly in your heart. But hold the method the way you would hold a small bird, with hands open enough that it could fly to you from any direction and land there safely. Say quietly to yourself, I do not know how this will come, but I know that it will come, and rest in the vast, patient intelligence that has infinite channels at its disposal, more channels than the reasoning mind could count in a lifetime. So speak this decree with me. I release the how, and trust the infinite channels of my good. I release the how, and trust the infinite channels of my good. The ninth law is, hold the vision steady until it hardens into form, and this is perhaps the quietest and most demanding of all the laws we have walked through together today. Because every teaching we have spoken of, the open mouth, the recognition of supply already present, the release of fear, the raised self-concept, the followed flash, the right action, the expectancy, the released how, all of these must be sustained, not for a moment, not for a single dramatic decree spoken once in a burst of inspiration, but across the ordinary days that stretch between the asking and the appearing. Florence Scovel Shinn called this the interim, that strange, often uncomfortable stretch of time after the seed has been planted in consciousness, but before it has broken through the surface of visible circumstance. And she taught that this interim is exactly where most people lose their harvest, not because their faith was wrong, but because their faith did not last long enough. Think of what happens to a seed once it is placed in the soil. For days, sometimes weeks, nothing visible happens at all. Beneath the surface, the seed is splitting open, sending down roots, quietly doing the very work that will one day burst upward into a stalk. And yet if a farmer were to dig it up every few days to check on its progress, worried that nothing seemed to be happening, he would destroy the very thing he was trying so anxiously to nurture. And how many of us dig up our own seeds daily, checking the bank account with anxious eyes, checking the phone obsessively for a reply, speaking our decree in the morning with real feeling, and then spending the very same afternoon telling a friend how discouraged we are, that nothing has changed. This digging up is itself a withdrawal of faith, and every time we do it, we delay the very harvest we are so anxious to see. The interim asks something very simple of us, and yet something very few of us are willing to give. It asks us to keep believing in the dark, exactly as we believed in the light. I want to tell you of a baker I will call Walter, who had run a small shop for many years, faithfully, quietly, and who felt strongly that the time had come to expand into the empty storefront beside his own. He applied for the loan that would make this possible, and he spoke his decree each morning before opening his ovens. My expansion is provided for now. The first month passed with no word. The second month passed, and doubt began arriving in small, reasonable disguises. Perhaps the bank had lost the papers. Perhaps he had asked for too much. Perhaps this was simply not meant for him after all. He found himself, without quite noticing it happening, complaining more often to his customers about how slow and unfair the process had become, and each complaint, though it felt like harmless venting, was quietly digging up the very seed he had planted. One evening, exhausted, he caught himself mid-sentence explaining to a customer why the loan would probably fall through, and he stopped, right there at the counter, and said instead, "No, I withdraw that. My expansion is already provided for. It is simply on its way." From that evening forward, he made a small, quiet decision. He would prepare for the expansion as though it were already approved. He began sketching where the new ovens would go. He began speaking to a friend about hiring extra help for the busier season ahead. He was not pretending. He was simply refusing to dig up the seed again. In the 5th month, with almost no warning at all, the loan was approved, and approved for more than he had originally requested. Walter said afterward that the hardest part of the entire experience was never the asking, and it was never even really the waiting. The hardest part was guarding his own mouth and his own thoughts during the waiting, so that his words did not contradict, day after day, the very thing his heart had already decreed. This is the deeper teaching hidden inside the 9th law, that the interim is not empty time, it is working time, hidden time, sacred time. The tide does not announce itself with noise as it turns far out at sea. It simply, quietly, faithfully rises, until one day the boats that were resting on dry sand are lifted and floating without anyone having seen the exact moment it happened. The dawn does not burst suddenly into a black sky. It comes by degrees, so gradual that if you stared at the horizon for even a single minute, you might swear that nothing at all was changing, and yet the darkness is retreating the entire time. This is how your good moves toward you during the interim, gradually, invisibly, faithfully, while the outer eye insists that nothing is happening. I think again of Theodora and her long 8 months of waiting for a home for her family, and I want you to notice something about her story that we did not linger on before. She did not simply wait passively, and she did not simply grit her teeth and endure. She actively guarded her speech during those months. When a well-meaning relative would ask her how the house search was going and sigh sympathetically about how difficult these things can be, Theodora would gently answer, "It is coming along beautifully. I already know which one is mine," even when she could not yet see it. This is no small thing, because Florence Scovel Shinn taught that idle words spoken carelessly during the interim can undo the work of a decree spoken powerfully only that morning. The mouth that opened wide to ask must not turn around an hour later and speak doubt into the very air it just filled with faith. This is why the 9th law asks so much of us. It asks for a consistency of speech and thought that most of us have never practiced in any other area of life. And so I ask you plainly today, what have you been saying in the in-between hours, in the quiet moments after your morning decree, when no one is listening but the universe itself? Have you been tending the seed, or have you been digging it up? Have you been speaking as though the answer is already settled, or have you been narrating your doubts to anyone who will listen? The 9th law does not ask you to pretend the waiting is comfortable. It only asks you to keep your speech and your inner posture aligned with the vision rather than with the appearance, because it is the appearance that is temporary, and it is the vision held steadily enough and long enough that eventually becomes the new appearance. All 9 laws we have walked through today are not separate tools to be picked up one at a time and set down again when convenient. They are 9 hands holding up the very same vision until it becomes solid enough to be seen with the outer eye. It is the raised self-concept that lets you feel worthy of the good during the wait. It is the released fear that lets you sleep peacefully at night during the wait. It is the expectancy that lets you prepare cheerfully during the wait. It is the released how that keeps you from forcing open the wrong door out of sheer impatience. And it is this ninth law, the holding of the vision steady, that gathers every other law together and carries them all the distance from the first quiet decree to the day the answer finally, visibly, undeniably arrives. So if you find yourself today, in your own interim, in your own stretch of quiet waiting, where nothing yet appears to have changed on the surface, take heart. The seed is not idle simply because it is invisible. Something is happening beneath the ground even now. Roots are forming even now. And your task in this moment is simply to guard your mouth, guard your thoughts, and keep faith warm until the ground finally gives way. So speak this decree with me. I hold my vision steady and let it come to form in perfect time. I hold my vision steady and let it come to form in perfect time. Here is the whole picture. We open our mouths wide because the fullness has always been waiting on the answer of our asking. We recognize that our supply is already near us, even before we can see it plainly. We release the fear that closes the channel and welcome the faith that opens it. We raise our own self-concept because we cannot receive above the picture we carry of ourselves. We follow the flash of guidance, the instant it arrives, before doubt has time to argue. We give right action to the small task in front of us, because that is the very road our larger good must travel. We hold expectancy like a cup already lifted, to catch the blessing. We release our grip on the how and trust the infinite channels available to a generous universe, and through all of it, we hold the vision steady across the quiet interim until it finally hardens into visible form. Now, if what you have received today has stirred something true in you, I want to invite you gently into something more. We have created a space called the Overflow Covenant, a quiet daily walk for those who are ready to move beyond simply hearing these laws and into actually living inside them, day by day, decree by decree, with guided practices drawn straight from this same wellspring of teaching. It is not a program of striving, it is a covenant of consistency, a way of keeping your own faith warm through every interim you will ever pass through, so that the next time your good seems slow in coming, you are not left to wonder and wait alone, but are walking a path already lit for you. If this calls to you, follow the invitation waiting just below this teaching, and let us walk this road of overflow together. And so once more, before we part today, let us speak the truth that opened this teaching, and let it close it as well. Say it with me. My mouth is open wide. My good is rushing in now. My word is my wand. Again, my mouth is open wide. My good is rushing in now. My word is my wand. They tried to bury this teaching once, in the quiet corners of a small book from another century. But truth planted in consciousness cannot stay buried. It rises the moment a mouth opens wide enough to receive it, and yours has opened today.